It doesn't have to be about taking things away. It doesn't have to be about doing without things. It can be quite the opposite. It can be about adding things that are positive solutions. It doesn't have to be reductive. You don't have to live a really minimal lifestyle to be quote unquote sustainable. Like, I think it can be abundant. It can be about really exciting extra things. And the minute I began to be more like that, it was just, there was so much joy in it. Just knowing that it can be like, it can be about doing things, not doing things.
Welcome back to the Process Podcast. In this episode, I have the pleasure to share with you a recording of a well overdue catch up with my good friend Bonnie Wright. Bonnie and I met years ago and bonded instantly over a love of good food and well-being. Bonnie has been a huge inspiration and guiding light for me, initially in discovering superfoods and potions and holding meditation events together at her parents' flat in London, and over the years, exploring the world of sustainable living and the environmental issues that we face. I love Bonnie's drive and passion, her determination to help others and to make a positive difference in pretty much everything she does is amazing. Best known for her role in Harry Potter and acting from a young age, Bonnie returned to her studies before becoming a director and producing several short films and music videos, amongst other projects. But alongside everything, Bonnie has been active in the wellness and environmental space for years. She's an ambassador for Greenpeace, Lumos, and the Rainforest Alliance. She's organised beach clean events and talks in LA. She's collaborated with several eco-friendly brands and projects. She's travelled the world with organisations including Oxfam, working on social projects and initiatives. She even headed up a petition at the Coca-Cola HQ to urge them to stop using single-use plastics. The work she's done and continues to do is educational and inspiring in a way that's just really realistic and understandable. She merges the need for ease and convenience in modern life with simple concepts to help people reduce their impact on the environment in an easy yet effective way. And I'm so excited to share a bit about her upcoming book, which she's still currently working on, about living more slowly and consciously in the modern world. I can't wait for it to be finished and out in the world because I know that it's something so many of us could use and learn things from. So I hope you enjoy this chat as much as I did and find it inspiring in some way. I'm sure you will. Hi Bonnie, how are you?
I'm very good, thanks. How are you?
Good, I'm well. How have you been keeping over the past few months?
I've been doing well, all things considered. It's definitely been up and down. Can't believe it's now just like about to hit a year. It's definitely made me have a different understanding of time, which has been interesting.
Yeah.
But I've been good.
Yeah, it's definitely like been a big wake-up call, I think, but not just, well, in so many ways, but I think the time aspect of it as well, it's just made people realise, I mean, for me also, it's made me realise we have more time during this pandemic, but I'm still managing to be so busy and struggle to slow down. At first I was like really enjoying going really slowly, but I think by habit we get back to like normality quite quickly, don't we?
Yeah, and I think when it becomes a new normal, you
Yeah.
have to...
Exactly.
I agree. At the beginning, I was like, oh, this is perfect. Whilst this is terrifying and we're in a pandemic, I'm quite good at being on my own. I'm quite good at self-discipline. I'm quite good at all these things that maybe people within more 9-to-5 workplaces kind of struggled with a little bit more. So I felt empowered by the amount of years I have spent in my own headspace and time at home, but disciplining myself for work.
Yeah.
So at first I kind of jumped to it and was sort of fine and really loved the quietness.
Yeah,
I had nowhere to be, nowhere to go. And then things trickle through and you have these new places to be and go, which is more virtual. But it's definitely been, I definitely have the fatigue as well, the pandemic fatigue.
Yeah, I think there's still that kind of underlying pressure to be doing stuff and using your time and learning new skills and doing all this stuff. But I think it's been definitely such a good reminder of how valuable time is and what you can do with it, and also it helps you to kind of filter through. I loved the phrase originally that they were using on the news of non-essential because I was like, it's literally what it is. There's so much we do in day-to-day life which is just not essential. And although it's sometimes really enjoyable or fun, or there's so many things I think that we don't need to do, and we end up prioritizing those over things that we really do need to do for our health or our well-being without actually necessarily knowing it. So
yeah, definitely. And I think that the essentialness of the systems that were like set up in terms of like, you know, huge offices of people going in, working these long hours, but not maybe outputting the work. It was just instead this like being there, being busy, being stressed as kind of like a proof of like productivity. And I think it radically shifted that, and I don't think we'd ever have thought that a situation would happen like this to make people completely rethink like structures that exist, which is kind of great. And I hope these same like radical rethinking like happens for other stuff that's like definitely not working or being productive.
Definitely, it is just that rethinking, isn't it? And it's just so much the norm that you don't even think, and it's so much out of your control, especially when you're like an employee in a huge office. You can't necessarily go to the boss and be like, why don't we all try working from home so we can like get out in nature more and like slow down a little bit. It's never gonna happen.
Yeah, it's like, what's the guy who has Patagonia, who's quite like that, isn't he? Like his book, like let my people go surfing, or I think it's called. The idea that like if the surf is good, like go surfing, as long as you get your work done today, you can still like have that fun and be a bit late this morning, because it's like, you know, if you still get what you're meant to be doing done, so to speak, but then you enjoy your day, will you not more value your employee, your workspace, and be more passionate to like give yourself to it, rather than being like bitter that you're like forced to be somewhere?
And what, like, actually, let's just go into that a little bit, because I think it would be interesting for people listening who have not usually been working from home and they've been forced to kind of do it. I know that you've been working from home a lot in most of your career, like kind of recently in your own projects and stuff, and working for yourself or freelance, but like, what's your journey been in kind of developing a good balance for work life, but also like a good working flow as well?
Yeah, I think it's really, really hard. I think, you know, some days one seems to be great at the discipline of things and ticking things off a list, and other times your just brain is just cannot focus. And I have found that, I think particularly with doing something creative where there's like an output, and often that output is like you're kind of pouring something out that's somewhat kind of vulnerable. I feel like you can't assume to be able to do that all the time. And I think I often sort of think about things as being input and output, hours or days. So, you know, I can be trying to write or trying to create an idea and it's just not happening. So I decide to like I just stop myself basically and be like, okay, maybe I just need to do some inputting for a few hours, which could mean researching, writing, going for a walk, like just letting inspiration come in, then knowing that maybe I can return later and have some output, be that writing or whatever I'm creating.
I love that idea of actually like not always having to be actively doing something, but also reading a book can be fueling or like feeding a certain project you're doing in a different way, but it always feels like a kind of luxury to stop and take things in, rather than always like actively creating stuff or putting stuff out there. That's really cool.
Yeah, and I think we've been a bit confused slightly, and I have myself, with input. I think because of social media and different things, I think we think that's like a waste of time, like oh, I just wasted an hour doing something that wasn't something that I could physically show for it. Because I think we begin to associate that now with like scrolling and like mindlessly looking at things. But I think if we're consciously, actively like looking for inspiration, yes, we don't have something to show for it, like a paragraph of writing or whatever, we that is productive. So I think, yeah, just that kind of understanding productivity, I think consciously like looking for inspiration is like productive.
It's part of it. Yeah, that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So I want to talk to you about so many things today, because I mean, we met at a time in maybe both of our lives, but definitely my life, where I was just getting into like discovering the wellness scene and spirituality and like all these things. And I remember you were one of the persons that I did so many things with for the first time, like all the women's circles we went to in New York, and the meditation workshop we did at your parents' house was like one of the first time I'd ever meditated. I'm just really inspired by everything that you do, and like the passion and enthusiasm that you have for all this kind of stuff, but also commitment to like not only your well-being and physical, mental well-being, but also the well-being of the planet and the work you do in sustainability as well. So I think it would be interesting to touch on each of them a little bit if we have time. But what was your journey like into living a more conscious, kind of slow life, and where did it start? I mean, how did you get to where you are in life right now?
Yeah, big one. I guess with all things, they start earlier than you really think. I think, so many, behavioural patterns, whether they are the same or in opposition to like your upbringing, I think they really happen when you're younger. I think for me, I grew up in the middle of London in not very green kind of neighbourhood. It was like pretty industrial neighbourhood. But I realized living in a city, I had the access to so many things, like be that culture, inspiration, be that people, be that other people's stories, just more of a sense of like a collective identity. I think by growing up in a city like that, I think you can feel like you're a part of something that's bigger than yourself. So I think that's like hugely influential. And then I would say, my parents have a very like mindful approach to life. They're very sort of like, they think a lot about everything. They're very conscious about the decisions they make and just like the interaction with the world they have. And they're both designers, so the way they kind of see and understand the world is through creating things, which is the same for me. And as well as the city, we spent a lot of time on the south coast of England because my parents have a house on the beach down there. So I also spent a lot of time in the sand, like playing in the sand, playing in the sea, and that definitely had a huge impact on me because I now kind of love to live by the ocean where I live now. And so that balance I was very fortunate enough to have that kind of cultural city experience, but then that kind of creative freedom outside. So that's like the first like foundational level, I guess. And then I think at school, I always loved to take part in things. I love to do the extracurricular activities. I love to like organize bake sales or different kind of things that were happening at school that was about taking part and showing up. I loved that, and I loved working as a team. So I think that inspired the kind of organizing side of environmental stuff I'm into, and just like finding community, I guess, has always been, whilst I spend a lot of time, weirdly and ironically, on my own, I actually am best with other people. So that was a big thing for me. And then I guess, the first trip that I did with a charity was with Oxfam to Senegal in 2012, and that was visiting different kind of remote farming communities and villages that were perhaps going to be threatened by either flash flooding and droughts. So that really showed me immediately just already how kind of turbulent weather was becoming and how quickly that was impacting people's livelihoods. And then later, a few years later, probably in about 2015 or 16, I can't remember now, I went on a ship with Greenpeace. And, I'd always been such a huge admirer of Greenpeace's work as an organisation. They were always so bold, I always knew them for these like crazy stunts they would do, sort of, tying huge signs to big buildings or, just these huge, very courageous things. And I think that was always really interesting to me. So I was so excited to be invited on their ship, the Arctic Sunrise, on a trip that they were doing along the Atlantic coast, just mainly raising awareness in different coastal communities about different issues. And so when I joined, the part that I joined the leg on, which is the interest I already kind of was beginning to have, was single-use plastic pollution in the ocean, and sort of why it was ending up here, and how we as consumers, citizens, and also how could governments and corporations, like who's basically responsible, and why is this happening? At that time, I really didn't know that much. I think I was just witnessing it, witnessing rubbish on the beaches, or
Yeah.
or witnessing kind of these problems in the news. And it was really that trip, being with the campaigners who worked in ocean plastics, being with the Greenpeace people. And then whilst we were on the ship, we were doing a lot of trawling for plastics, which is kind of like literally fishing for plastics. You basically put this net down and you're kind of capturing, and all this data is going into like a big system of data across the world. So that was terrifying, because not one time did we put the net down did it not come up with plastic.
Really?
And that had been the same for their entire journey on the ship for the last like month or so. So that trip, just like, I was so inspired by the campaigners and their commitment to it, and just the language they used around change and just like possibilities. I really came home and just was this mixture of really looking at my own home and my own behaviors, and just seeing how could I begin to break up with my relationship to plastic in any way I could. And then also, what could I be doing with kind of the platform I have to communicate this story on sharing that same thing, like each looking at our own habits and day-to-day activities, but also, you know, who are the corporations to call out, who are the governments to call out who aren't, you know, protecting us with policies. So yeah, that really spurred on a whole kind of real focus on that issue for me. And I think the thing with anything to do with the environment or the climate crisis, like anything, is just how interconnected everything is. So you open the Pandora's box of it, and then you're instantly like, oh, this and this and this, and you begin to see how everything is so related. So I think aside from ocean plastics, another huge interest of mine is soil health as well. Just this idea that, like, if our oceans and our soil become too unhealthy for us, we really kind of don't have much of a future. So they're the two things I'm super interested in, the soil health and the ocean health.
And what were like some of the big wake-up calls for you, or like maybe not a wake-up call because you had this whole journey of like gradually kind of experiencing different charities and different initiatives, but like statistics that were kind of initially really shocking to you? I
think statistics, sometimes I think we've become so numb to statistics. I think, like, for me, it's always stories beyond statistics. I think when I've had the fortunate chance to like meet people who are more like on more frontline of the issues, or have been directly affected, their health has been directly affected, and you always find like such hope at those places, in those communities. And it's honestly these soulless kind of corporate places that you go to that have so much power, that just lack all sense of like possibilities, hope, humanity,
and
like
effort.
Anything. And that's just the most devastating, really, beyond any statistics. I think just like, you want to believe that all these governments and corporations are made up of individuals, but often the bureaucracy of everything can just get in the way, and it just feels, I think the frustration has been what's been the most shocking to me, just how, you know, obviously all these organizations just have to have so much, like Greenpeace have to have like just so much patience and like dedication. But I think for me the biggest reality check has just been, which I think has been a lot this year too, just how a lot of systems just don't work. I think that's this upsetting thing. I think, like, for instance, the waste management systems and recycling as a system doesn't work, and is pretty kind of corrupt in an idea that we kind of told to believe that things can be recycled, but it's very, very grey area, different plastics, and the way in which we're told, like, just even the designing of packaging is somewhat misleading. And it's just a shame that we're left to kind of figure it out, or we're left with the responsibility. And I think that's the most frustrating thing. Yeah, it's
really hard that it's, like you said, the systems and like the corporations and the brands that we've come in modern life to kind of depend on it's hard to break up, like you put it, with breaking up with plastic. It's really hard to break our habits because we've kind of come so far.
I mean, there's definitely, you know, there's obviously so many incredible solutions, and there are definitely obviously brands and organizations who are genuinely doing something about this. I think it'll just be very exciting when those things don't become niche and they become mainstream. But it always happens on the fringe. You know, changes always happen on the fringes of society and of things. And I think it will take over the norm because it has to. But I just think at the moment, unfortunately, there's like a lot of greenwashing going on before it really is honest and truthful. And this, the reality is, I think, as always, like when things are few steps ahead of the kind of big systems, I do think like design and ingenuity of materials is almost like 10 years ahead of like the waste systems.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's time that we kind of have and don't have. But I think it's also, things are happening. Like exciting solutions are genuinely being discovered and kind of put at scale.
Yeah, it's just making them, they take time and you're discovering new things because it's kind of, it's hard. It's ironic as well because you're going back often to like the roots, like there's leathers made from pineapple skins. You're literally going back to like such simple ingredients, but it's how you then formulate that in a way that's also ethical and sustainable, but provides for the modern lifestyles we've become so demanding in, and like we need convenience, and you know, and it's maybe not me and you, we're very much into like kind of, we know what's going on and we like can quite easily, I'd say, like cut down on certain things, and like we would consciously go home and say, how can I cut down on my plastic? But I think some people who don't find it as easy, or they really have not learnt much at all in the space, they're kind of like, where would I start and how would I even why would I stop, how would I use like a reusable thing to rub off my makeup, because then I have to wash it, and like you know, it's like somehow it's so new to some people. So it's like how you make alternatives that are actually realistically going to be used en masse as well, which is the issue, I'd say.
Yeah, I think it's the accessibility, the affordability of all these things. I think also just, you know, with everyone, it's just I think it's always just seeing the more people you see around yourself using these things with ease and excitement and joy, the more you're going to want to do it, more than the statistics. I think if you have a friend who loves this new product they've been trying and they just can't stop talking about it, then we get influenced by that much quicker than we get influenced by, you know, headline, shocking amount of plastics enters this ocean today. You know, I think, and that's, and I think as a as a storyteller, the only thing I know how to do or kind of have the experience in, that's to me where there's the potential. And I think now more than ever, science kind of and innovation and all those things are beginning to be communicated in a better way, whether that's through brilliant documentary filmmaking, whether that's through people being more interested in podcasts, talks, all these things that kind of decode these often quite confusing topics into more conversational, like day-to-day things. So I do think it's an exciting time for science too. I think obviously there's lots of denial, but I think there's also, it's a kind of exciting that like people are interested because maybe it's been communicated in a more like
authentic way,
normal, colloquial way. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's almost like we're not, I think definitely in our day and age, in our generation, we're not depending so much on like the news and the headlines and the media. It's really nice that we have, with technology, been able to connect more with like experts that maybe would have previously been pushed to the side or kind of told to be quiet or like kind of be saying the wrong things because it's calling out like the big corporations, you know. So it's been really good in that sense to have access to like people who are doing things that are behind the scenes, maybe bubbling away at the surface in sustainability, that we can actually learn about quicker than we would have done probably a few decades ago.
Yeah, exactly. And our access to information is just like at the, you know, pinnacle of, and not just reading through papers, but watching videos, you know, tuning in. There's just so many different formats to learn, I think. And I think as well, this whole year and recent years, like transparency has been like a huge theme. I feel like transparency in politics, in kind of in human attitudes, social justice, all these different, you know, climate. I think people ask questions more now, and I think people like should, and it's really good that they do. And I think that I think being curious is a great thing to be
Yeah.
in terms of just your day-to-day like approach to life.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's very much about taking the responsibility to kind of educate yourself and not to just, I mean, I've never done well if someone has told me like don't do something, because I need to know like why, and I need to kind of dig really deep to kind of figure out everything behind it. But I think that is the only way for me for things to go in and for me to kind of integrate things and really initiate change and like take on board information that makes me think differently and I don't know, you just learn so much more. So I think that's really good advice to kind of tap into like all the resources we have available to us now, like videos and books and other people and stuff.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I've definitely learned through the process of implementing different habits or just really changing, ever since that Greenpeace trip and really being kind of thrown into this new direction, I think the most interesting thing that I've learned is that it doesn't have to be about taking things away. It doesn't have to be about doing without things. It can be quite the opposite. It can be about adding things that are positive solutions. It doesn't have to be reductive. You don't have to live a really minimal lifestyle to be quote unquote sustainable. Like I think it can be abundant. It can be about really exciting extra things and same in one's attitude towards wellness. It's the same thing. I think it's not about reducing things. It's about actually adding things, thriving. And I think that's what I've definitely learned through these last few years. And the minute I began to be more like that, there was so much joy in it. I think at first there was a lot of like, oh my gosh, I've done that wrong, I've done this wrong, and it's like that guilt. And I think a lot is about compromise. It's about knowing like, okay, look, I'm really trying my best in this and this. This isn't yet made possible for me to do because it's just not I don't have time for it, or it's not accessible to me. So I think compromise is a big one. I think just celebrating imperfectness of it and just knowing that it can be like it can be about doing things, not doing things.
Yeah, I love that approach to it, and it's definitely the same in food. Like how I remember so many people would used to say to me like, oh, I could never go without like this or that, and that is probably actually what inspired me to always try and make like healthier alternatives, because I was like, you don't have to. That's the thing. Like we just need to be way more conscious about the ingredients that are going into those things and like the way you're consuming them. But I think you're totally right. Like as soon as you start looking at alternative ways to live, you realize that you can pretty much do everything you want to do, or most of the things you want to do, in a way that's almost more joyful. It maybe takes a bit more preparation or a bit more awareness, but in a way like it's so satisfying to make your own deodorant or toothpaste or something out of like simple natural ingredients, and it's so satisfying to eat a bowl of like fresh food that's seasonal, and you see things outside like growing, because it's just like nature's doing its thing, and that is so much more of a like creative and curious and abundant way to live. And it ends up being more easeful, I think, in the end, because you're sort of more aligned with everything that's going on. You're more connected.
You can have a closer relationship, whether it is like you say, like a seasonal plate of vegetables that have been grown pretty locally to you. Like you will taste the difference of it, and like nutritionally you will literally have more energy than probably like 3 plates probably of like worse of food. And I think so actually it becomes simpler. Like whilst I say it's not obviously about doing without or becoming too simple, but also it has for me become simpler. Like I think get less things now. I just like refine and reduce the amount of things rather than spreading myself across too many things or too many choices. And I think naturally, one week you might have the time and you're doing all these things, and you have a great week where you feel really connected to your practices, your environment. And then there are other weeks where just it doesn't happen, and I think that's fine. Like there could be weeks where you don't manage to sort of cook well for yourself, or you do buy a packet of toothpaste but last week you managed to, or last few months you were making them. I think that ebb and flow as well is really kind of important too, because that's definitely happened for me. Like setting all these new habits up, you feel great, and then stuff happens, life happens, and things slip. but then they come back again.
Yeah.
And I think that's also, you know, needs to be like, that's normal.
Yeah, it's balance, and it's like everything is kind of, I've rediscovered the word practice recently, because I think everything should be approached as kind of like a practice. We're practicing things. We are, instead of like, it's the same as a ritual, but you have a practice, but also in life we're just practicing, because we're never really aware or completely prepared for what life throws at us. So it's like, in a way, everything we're doing, we're kind of practicing different foundations so that we can move more easily when things do inevitably go like up and down. And
Yeah, and I think practice, you know, I agree. And I think also we're not here to like get it right, and I don't think we ever will. Like, I think we're always going to be refining and getting it better. Like, it would be a very boring life if we do everything and we'd already like established everything. I think that's why like you keep going, because you know that you can always like further certain things. And I think there are practices that you could do for a really long time and they slip, and maybe they need rethinking. Like for me, I feel like at the minute, I've always I've meditated for a long time, but in these last few months my practice has just totally slipped.
Me too.
And that's not weirdly reflective of like, you know, I'm like, why I can't get to the bottom of it, because I'm so like, this is the perfect time for me to be doing it, because I'm kind of overwhelmed with the deadline I have, and I would be getting much more like energy if I were doing it. And I have been really trying actually these last week or two to really get it back going, but I've just been hitting a wall. And it's like, do I need to rethink maybe my practice? Do I need to be re-inspired again by learning a different way? Like maybe I'm not meant to be doing that practice right now. Maybe I'm meant to be doing a different one.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And to know that you can always, I think, discover new things and try new things. And it's like, you don't have to stick with something forever. And even if it's not working, like it shouldn't feel like a struggle, and it should feel effortless. And I think there's always a reason why you're not pulled. If you're not pulled to something, it's just either you don't need it right now, or you're finding the benefits from it maybe in other ways. And I don't know, but it's a very good way to kind of approach everything, I think, in life, and know that you can always refine, and like you're changing every day. I was speaking to someone on the podcast recently who was like, we're literally a different person every day when we wake up. Like, we could be in a different mood, we could feel different, our hormones could be doing different things, like our energy levels will be different, but like we're genuinely just like refreshed and like a blank canvas almost every day. And I thought it was such a nice way to explain it, because we always need different things, and we're changing all the time. And I think that's why the awareness of like brands or businesses and initiatives and methods and rituals is like the research we were talking about earlier comes back around at some point in your life. Even if you discover something today and you don't necessarily feel drawn to it, knowing or having that kind of in your mind will maybe serve you in a few months, or you could come back to it, you know. It's just the awareness, I guess.
I agree. And I think there can be times, there has definitely been in my life in terms of my work and career, where I feel like have really been working, you know, been really, whether that's furthering my education or really just working really hard and just feeling like it not coming back to me, like, where's this effort going, you know, where is it all kind of going? And then finally things can happen, and they really, I think that's a huge thing you experience through your 20s, but I feel like it was about a year ago or a year and a half ago where suddenly everything just seemed to just really strangely come together. And I knew that wasn't luck. I knew that wasn't random. I knew that was from genuine work I'd been putting in kind of like slowly since I'd, you know, graduated from university, that at times was so frustrating because I felt like nothing was ever working out or coming back in the way I really wanted it to. And it was just this really interesting moment of being like, oh, like none of that was ever lost. Like, I think it's the same way when you think about, I think it's the same way in love too. Like when you can feel sort of burnt or hurt by a relationship, by something, I think you think at the minute like, oh, that was just a waste. Like I gave this part of me and then it was just taken and wasted. And I think I remember once, I think it was honestly on I remember, don't know how it was written, but it was basically saying how like love given is never lost, and it kind of comes back around, and it is like in the ether, and it's like, it's not, you don't lose that. And I remember being so comforted by the idea that like it will come back around to me. And I think that's been the same with my work, and it was just so nice to feel that. And I feel like I wish someone could have told my younger self, like, this is all like, it's all going to come to something, like, keep going. And I'm pleased I did keep going, but it's interesting how things just happen. And the same, like you're saying, that, and like that idea of like, we're a new person every day, like, hormonally, chemically. And I think it's the same when you look back at like times in your life where you're like, wow, I feel like I was a completely different person then. Like, who was that person? And it's just like a reminder of how real that is, like how we are just constantly, like, things are temporary, and like you can evolve. It's pretty amazing.
It is so amazing. And it's in like hindsight, which is like the hard part, because in the moment it's always like such a struggle, unless you can get to that place where you feel you can have more openness and acceptance, which I feel like I've definitely began to master in more recent years. But I was the same with as you. And I think the first time I really realized, like, with love as well, that anyone you meet adds value to your life. And if they don't necessarily, I feel like you have something that they maybe needed. And I've always felt like that exchange is just so needed. Anyone you meet, almost, not necessarily just romantic relationships, but how like much joy they potentially brought you at a period of your life, and how just something that you could have learnt from them that you're not able to put your finger on it. But I think that totally everything is happening for a reason and is needed and is meant to be as it is, whether or not you think like, oh, I love this person and I think he or she is perfect for me and I want them to like love me back and I want it to feel perfect and be amazing and like seamless. Just because you want that doesn't mean that it's going to happen. And I think it's the best way to go into anything, and especially relationships, is with that openness of like, let's see what happens, what is there to learn here, what is there to experience, and like you enjoy parts and you don't enjoy other parts, and that's just kind of life. And it's kind of hard to take sometimes, but
it's hard to like, when you're like, I want to know now if this is a good idea or not. But I think too, what's interesting about that is like, which I began to be better at, which is what I think why the kind of karma of stuff all finally came together, was I think I was like more specific with what I wanted. I think before I was too afraid to ask, just say out loud to myself, okay, I would really want this, and this. This could be through everything. This could be career, where I am living, like my day-to-day life, like relationship. And I feel like the minute I was a little bit more clear and courageous by saying, like, asking for maybe what I may have judged to be too much, I think the minute things started to happen, because I think I wasn't like being clear with the way I was like communicating with people, jobs, career, myself, with what I wanted. And I think the minute I was like, a bit more bold of being like, okay, I want X, Y, and Z, even if that sounds ridiculous. Like, and obviously that didn't come quickly. It took me a long time to even, but I think the minute I was able to be a bit more clear, it's just, I think then you're able to be vulnerable, basically. And I think like, it's like an interesting, because I think naturally, like the work that we're in, where it's so much to do with ourselves, like obviously you think you're being vulnerable all the time, but I think there's sometimes something you're like being too protective over, or that fear of failing at something. And I don't know, I think it's being patient and understanding fate and letting things unfold, but I think also being actively like pretty clear, even if things change. Like you could say what you want this week and that could evolve, but I think just at least like being bold with that.
And is manifestation something that you kind of have explored? Because what you're talking about kind of makes me think of asking for more and raising your kind of self-worth, which is something that's huge for me. And I remember the first time I read the words self-worth and I was like, isn't it just like self-esteem? Like I kind of was like, what's the difference? But self-worth just completely changed my mindset on so much about the way I communicate about myself, communicate with myself, but also the way I kind of thought about myself and like deemed myself worthy of things. And what you said about the moment you just kind of started asking for more without feeling bad and not deserving and stuff, that's when things begin to shift, because you're not so scared to kind of, or guilty. I think there's a lot of guilt around like asking for what you want, or like dreaming big, you know. And
yeah, I think... definitely, I agree. Self-worth is like, took me a really long time, and then there was a moment where I was like, oh, like I think my self-worth is pretty low. And then you're like, oh, okay, like, oh, I guess I do. My narrative inside my head is pretty reductive and reducing and doesn't really believe in me and all those things. And I think at the same time I was like, okay, I've got to be more clear with what I want, was the same thing of like, okay, I need to change the tone in which I like speak to myself, you know, like if I like, I'm not going to get anywhere if I genuinely every day I'm telling myself I'm not going to get what I want, you know, or like I don't deserve that, or like, oh, that's not going to happen, like that's a silly idea. And so I think it was massively changing the language I was kind of communicating to myself with, and being clearer with what I want was also associated with self-worth, because if I was clear with what I wanted, that showed that I had higher self-worth, because I believed that I could and should be able to achieve that. And I think, and then in terms of manifesting, I think manifesting to me is like, again, another thing that was sort of misleading. Like that sounds pretty like wishy-washy to me at first,
and a bit like magical.
And I think the minute it's about not just like dreaming and visualizing, and it's more about these things of like asking for what you want, having the self-worth, I do think then manifesting makes sense to me, because it's like basically putting out quite specific goals and plans and doing the work to hope that they come back to you. And I think, I forget who's that quote, who I think it's like an artist who's like, inspiration will come, but it has to find you working, or something like that.
That's nice.
And I think that's so right. I think it's, you know, and I think that's the same with any creative practice. Like you don't just sort of sit and wait for the idea to sort of fly through the window. You know, you genuinely have to be working at it. And I think it's the same with like the concept of manifesting.
Definitely.
Yeah, because it's got to be it's got to be the right manifestation or dream for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Like rather than trying to manifest a dream that maybe isn't yours.
Yeah.
It's like what you think you should be doing.
Yeah. But that's when you experience kind of struggle, isn't it, in life? And then I think that is all part of the process in some cases of just like rewriting your list, or like assessing things very regularly to be like, is this really, really, really what I want to do? Or is this like, and why, like the why behind it as well. And then looking at like the lifestyle you want to live, not just like the things you want to check off your list and like achieve. But that's such a nice quote. I think you have to be like in that flow state in order to have that energy of like movement and doing and creating for like ideas to kind of slip in.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, like you say as well, just being honest with yourself of like, is this what I really want to be doing? Because there has kind of been 2 points in my life where I've held on to what I was doing and what I thought I should be doing. And it took me longer than it probably should have to be like, oh, wait, I could let myself off the hook maybe here, because this clearly is not working and it's not finding me like happiness. And just the rush of relief and like freedom that you get when you just let that thing go for a moment is just like so good. And you suddenly are just like so much more inspired to do this other thing that you were maybe doubting could be a thing, but you let yourself off the hook for something old. I mean, for instance, one of those moments was, you know, I kept going back to this kind of loose idea for this book, and I didn't know that it was going to be a book. I didn't know what kind of thing it was going to be, but it was basically something that had accumulated through all the work that I'd been doing in terms of like these, you know, at home sort of my intimate journey, I guess, with my relationship to the environment, and not really knowing where that sat. It just sat in my own curiosity. Like it was just something that I did at home and was interested in, and I was really inspired by, whether that was kind of the curiosity into the facts, the materials of products, like where things come from, what happens to them. That was just like something that filled my day-to-day thing. And I was finding more joy from just that thing that I love to do, rather than the kind of, at that moment, and still am doing that, but in that moment, you know, writing films, making films since graduating from film school. And I was hitting a bit of a kind of wall with that, but I was just like really inspired more by all these environmental stuff. But I just thought that's just something that I'm passionate about, you know, this is my career in film. And then it was just like, what, you know, why not do something that's bringing me joy? And then I began to formulate an idea for a book. And then the pandemic happened, and there was no way I was going to be making any films because of the kind of reality of things. And suddenly my whole year was then this thing that I was kind of holding off to do, which was what's now become a book. And just like the amount of like new excitement and relief and flow, it's just been just working and flowing. And it just clearly was what I was meant to be doing at this moment. So I think you can let yourself off the hook and know that you can go back to things too. Like you don't close the door on things.
Yeah. It's all part of your like journey and experience, and they've built up to like this moment. Let's talk about the book quickly, because I'm really interested to hear more about it.
Yeah, so I'm about kind of 2 months away from the deadline of it, which is kind of an overwhelming moment. And can't believe it's all like happening and how quickly this year went, because I started writing it. I mean, all the kind of proposal and phases of sort of developing it happened last year. But kind of actually started writing it after, you know, the publishing deal and everything in November. And I kind of thought like, oh, it's like I've got till May next year, that's fine. And then suddenly the time flies. Luckily, like I was saying, I definitely think I have tools of sort of discipline in terms of working from home and getting things done. But it's been a whole new medium for me to work in, writing a book. And essentially the book is basically a sort of like lifestyle, housekeeping book about sort of things that you can do within the intimate environment of your home that can help you have a bit more of a sort of closer relationship, a more tangible relationship with the possibilities of change and solutions around the climate crisis. So sort of, going back to the kind of whys, like if I did this, why? What would that do for the planet? What would that do for me? And it's really looking at the intersection of our health and the planet's health and how closely they're tied. And really, I think that we're more threatened by what's happening right now than the planet is. So I think it's like reconnecting with that, like how we as a system are so deeply woven, obviously, into the systems that happen, literally the most obvious ones of, you know, the sun shining and water, you know, raining and growing things, like just simple things like that. And then bigger issues of more like, you know, human-made systems. So just trying to look at, hopefully just reconnect all those kind of tangent things into one more through line by using the home as kind of our first environment, rather than, you know, I think I was obviously toying too with like, do I write a book on my experience of kind of working with organizations and more about sort of, I would say I'm an advocate. I wouldn't say I'm an activist, because there are very more dedicated human beings beyond myself that are genuinely activists. So I think for me, activism was not really the topic to write my book on, but instead what was more interesting and authentic and personal to me was just these small, quiet things I was doing at home that became the more interesting story. Because they've really honestly enabled me to feel closer and more kind of empowered. Because I think at first, for instance, after the Greenpeace trip, like I was saying, you know, you came home and you start trying to do all these things, and then you get totally overwhelmed. And you think there's no point. Like nothing I ever do is going to make any difference. So I've been through those feelings and understand them. And I think I was like, how do I connect with other people who might feel the same, knowing that other people are going to feel the same? So I wanted to write a book that hopefully could like find a place for those feelings, those kind of that ebb and flow of like feeling empowered, but then also sometimes feeling a little bit kind of lost with our connection to it all.
Yeah. And what are some of your personal, like, some of the most important pillars to keep balanced and, like, physically, mentally, whilst also having a reduced negative impact on the planet as well? What would you say are some of the, like, main pillars in life that are, like, things to be conscious of? And also, what are your personal, like, rituals or routines, just some of them, like, for anyone listening who kind of, needs some inspiration?
Yeah, I think it's like, it's an interesting question, like the pillars of things. I think it's just like respecting like the most basic things that make us stay alive.
Yeah.
Which is like water, soil, like the sun, all these very basic, simple things that like enable us.
You can't necessarily see them.
Yeah, you can't see them, but they're all around us. We're part of it. I think just often reminding myself, like, if I need to go to nature, where, you know, that's now become this like, I love being in nature. I think it's kind of a hard thing, like we've romanticized nature, and, you know, I know that I'm very fortunate and privileged enough to have, looking at a tree right now, can walk to the beach, all those things. But I think you've got to remind, like, just looking down at my body is nature. Like, that's as close as I could possibly get, and it's right here. I'm inside it. And I think that's often like a practice that I need to remind myself of. Like, I am as fragile as that. I'm also as like sturdy and strong as a tree outside. All those things I think I like to think about, because to me it feels similar to how like a yoga practice is about kind of like, I don't know, the act of like using your own body to like work things out, like get things like kind of, I don't know, whether it's you're stuck on something or different things. I think it's like useful just to look at your first self before you start looking at like the wider things and seeing how much I rely on soil that grows my food that I eat and keeps me alive, you know? And then other pillars, I think to me what's been a really difficult pillar of mine to keep going is, during this whole pandemic, is kind of community and feeling like I'm a part of something. I think whilst obviously the internet and social media and all these things are amazing, I do think that sometimes, and maybe it's because, you know, I usually realized that I was traveling more than I do and just more like going home or going to different cities for work. I think that connectivity and connectedness is a big pillar of mine, I realized, and I have found it quite hard to keep going during this time. So, you know, it's like, how do you cultivate that elsewhere? Or how do you like have things that make you feel part of the whole, but again, don't need to be to show productivity. Like, it's not like, I need to go and be part of some group and do something. It's more just like literally being around people for no reason other than being around them, is a big pillar of mine. And I mean, in terms of like practices, as I was saying, I thought a big pillar of mine was meditation, and it is still, but like how am I maybe needing to redefine or change up my practice to kind of be grounded by that again. And then, I mean, I think there are so many things that I do so much now that I like forget that they're anything, because I'm so used to doing them.
Yeah, exactly.
So you forget, but I don't know, just the simple, like I've always been, you know, I've lived alone a lot in my life, and I've never seen that as a reason to not bother to take the time to prepare a special meal for myself, to sit down and actively choose to concentrate on a really good film or a really good book. I think just that, and I think that's to do with self-worth maybe too. Like I understand why sometimes one can get so low that you're not worth making something nice and you just eat something super basic and you just watch mindless TV. Like I do that obviously too, but I think actively like deciding to prepare something and be conscious through the process of cutting the things, cooking the things, eating it, like I just think that I realize is really important to me, and I get a lot of nourishment from that, just actively preparing something, or maybe even making something I've never made before, because that forces me to be more conscious for the process. And to me, that often, if nothing else, can take me out of my kind of busy mind. Then that's always been something I've relied on, the kind of ritual of cooking and just having like a physical, tangible, like things to hold and touch, unlike, you know, writing or the internet when it feels a bit conceptual. So yeah, I think for me, a big pillar for me is just taking the time to kind of consciously nourish myself, and
like physically and mentally. It doesn't need to just be just food, but like with meditation as well, you have that as like
exactly. And going for, you know, I walk a lot. I think I've become so aware living in like a non-walking kind of city so much, how much happiness I used to get from walking around London or New York, and how much I could process my thoughts just by moving through them. So I walk quite a lot. Like, luckily, having a dog, you're forced to walk, and I'm very lucky that there are lots of places kind of I can walk to around here that are like nice walks. So walking is a thing for me, and not like, I mean, sometimes I'll run or hike, and I definitely do exercise and yoga, but honestly, just the simple act of like walking is also really a big one for me.
Oh, it's been so nice to catch up and to chat with you. I just have 5 questions that I always end on.
Yeah, cool.
First one would be your biggest life lesson, or like a pivotal moment or turning point.
Yeah, honestly, I guess like last year when the sort of pandemic and everything unfolded, like suddenly these things that I would rely on that kind of made up my career, whether that was like making films or like access to the world for jobs or traveling, suddenly was no longer. It forced me to do this project that was hovering, which is this book, and it was a blessing. And whilst it's horrible that a pandemic created that eventuality for me, and it's, you know, unfortunate for people who that's not the case, and it's been, you know, really difficult. For me, I'm very lucky that just like forced me to go on a different path. Like, I had to just redesign my like how I was working, and what I was relying on to work. So that was huge, like pivotal moment for me, because I've ever since that moment been experiencing a lot of joy in my work. Yeah,
like a little reroute.
3
things that help you to enjoy the process or trust the process when things are maybe unknown or uncertain.
I think really genuinely believing in, I guess karma might be the easiest way to describe it, but like knowing that like things add up, and things without knowing it like relate to each other. Like, sometimes you're doing one thing that does feel absolutely no connection to something else, but it kind of like does. So there's just trusting, I think, in like it all culminating in the right way, I think. And then I don't know, just believing that things can change. I think like my process, the way I do things can change, and what I want can change, and that's okay. Like, to not be this feeling like, oh, I failed because I set out to do that and it didn't happen and now I've changed course. Is that misleading or confusing? I don't think it is. I think like that's just a good thing that it's evolving. I don't think what else. I think, as I was saying before, this like way I see things, that this like in and out, this idea that like when I feel like nothing's quite happening, or I begin to like lose the joy in creating and things, I just try and go outside, whether that's literally, or go outside of the space I'm in and kind of read something, just completely just shake things up and just look at something completely different. That really like reinvigorates me. And also to not prematurely going back to do the work, I think is important. Like, really go somewhere else, or knowing too that like sometimes you do have to hit those rock bottoms of certain things where you get really stuck, because then you suddenly get this drive to just flip the whole thing upside down. I think sometimes it's important to just to really not like or be proud of something that you've done. Like if you're doing some work, I can actually really do a lot better than this.
Yeah.
And you get bummed about it and upset about it. It's a good thing because
Yeah.
like you're checking in with yourself.
Yeah, it's definitely when you're like stripped of everything, or like at that rock bottom, that you can just that you have the space and power behind you to kind of literally just change, for everything to change, rather than like dropping things a little bit here and there along the way, and like picking something up and not quite letting go of something fully, and like that kind of keeps you in kind of a struggle or like a unsteady place. And as soon as you get to like the worst of it, the only way is up. And I think yeah
I think also sometimes you can't be, there are either friends or family who can be like brutally honest with you sometimes. Like my brother and I, like sometimes we're each good at really checking in with each other's like work or processes, and sometimes I find he can be like brutally honest with me, and it can be hurtful. Then I'm like, oh wow, I needed to hear that, and it sets me off on this whole new buzz of things.
Good.
So I think just often good to have people around you too that maybe you can be your people to help you be on track.
Definitely. And it's not always going to be the things you want to hear, but like even if you don't take them super seriously or personally, there's probably going to be something in it that's going to like flip a switch and
or take a while to like accept. A few weeks later you're like, I guess actually you're kind of right.
Okay, recent discoveries. So anything can be like podcasts, people, brands, books, anything.
Recent discoveries. I've been really trying to make a lot more things at home while I've been like writing a lot. I've been really like, I always feel super calm when I've like using my hands and getting my hands dirty. So I've been trying to just like find the time to make things or do little projects that can take me out of my screen work and just trialing different things, whether that's like little kind of low waste DIY kind of products at home, little things like that I'm just like, I don't have the time to do that. And like, yes, I have the time to do that, and just carving out those times to try different things. What else? I've been recently, even though I'm probably me and every single person in the world, like baking bread, I've been recently like finding my way into like fermented things, and like that's sent me down this like really interesting route. I've been really interested in like grains and looking at like heirloom seeds and the importance of like how we need to keep seeds in their most like raw original way in terms of like our food security in the future.
That's cool.
And so I've been really interested in like, that's kind of spurred off this whole interest in like the heritage of seeds and like and grain varieties and where they come from and how certain seeds like can be better for our soil and how obviously unfortunately so many have been modified or used in like monocrop farming that has kind of destroyed soil. So I'm always interested in like how certain practices can come into my life, whether that's like the bread making, for instance, and then spur off a whole kind of like curiosity into something. So that's definitely been one. What else have I been into? I feel like I probably do all the same things all the time. I definitely have been better at like podcasts and audiobooks a lot more recently, just like on my walks. Audiobooks too have been good because I feel like I love information. Like I love listening to people like podcasts like this, but I think sometimes just to be like whisked away on a story is really nice.
So
just
good.
like I think just audiobook, especially if you can get like find someone who's really a person you love that's read it, whether that's an actor or someone. I think it's just really good to do, just to be lost in a story.
Do you have any good recommendations?
Well, I'm listening to The Midnight Library right now.
I read
that was kind of popular last year. So Carrie Mulligan read that. And I then did before that listen to White Teeth by Zadie Smith on audiobook. And also there's a lot of my friend just did it's a podcast, but it's a scripted, it's a scripted podcast, and it's like a sci-fi series that's called From Now. And that was really good. That was just like 6 episodes, like quite high like energy, but only like 20-30 minutes each episode. So I'm like constantly interested in how like mediums are used for storytelling and how it works a little bit more for life. I think just audio. I think it can be like
I'm exactly
still
the
walking,
same.
driving, doing things.
You can do so much. and it takes you into like another world. It's so nice.
Yeah.
Okay, your current favourite meal or something you've been making a lot recently?
Yeah, I've really weirdly got into making pasta recently, like homemade pasta. And just like there's this one that I love to do where you literally make each spaghetti thing. You don't put it through a machine, it's all done by hand, and you just kind of roll out each spaghetti basically by hand. And it's really forces you to slow down because you've got to put the kind of right pressure on it as you're making it. So I can be usually sometimes when I'm cooking quite like fast and hard with the way I do things. So doing that has been really nice, and doing it with people if you can is nice. I don't know, yeah, it's just been a really like,
it's cool.
Yeah, just like slow process, and how much you kind of just enjoy that simple, what usually was a simple bowl of pasta is now like, oh, I took a little bit more time to do.
That's cool, yeah.
So yeah, just that's been nice. And like as we're going into, I don't know, yeah, it's been nice. We're on this like middle of the season change right now, and feeling like spring's kind of coming, and you can feel it being reflected in the food that you can buy, you know, right now. And I think it's always nice when you just come out, especially I think when you come out of that dormant winter feeling to then be heading into spring is like
the best.
There's like fresh air, there's like, I don't know, yeah, just I love how reflected it is in like, I don't know, the colours on your plate or all those kind of things.
Final one is 3 questions we should be asking ourselves on a regular basis to kind of check in and just check that we're feeling good, but like on our path as well.
I think, yeah, honestly, going into that self-worth thing is a really, you know, I think like is how I'm talking to myself, how I'd want other people to talk to me, or how I would talk to other people. I think just the language around how we are, like the narrative inside our head, I think is a good thing to check in with. Just like, am I being nice to myself, I think, with the language I'm saying? Or, like, am I believing in myself? Because I think with all things, you know, we're the only person that's ever going to want what from our life is. Like, I think when we can assume that someone else needs to be as interested in a project I'm doing, or, you know, the kind of validation or collaboration. And I think we're the most interested and invested in ourselves than anyone else is ever going to be. So it's important to have that like positive dialogue, I think. I think I think sometimes like I'm interested in like what things do I need to unlearn. I think whether or not that's like a habit or like an attitude, or like maybe like a societal belief or system that's kind of like been put upon me, or like I've grown up in. I think it's always important to be like, are there anything that I could like learn differently, or maybe like admit to myself is not maybe the right way, or like I don't know that. I think it's important to like question things that like we hold on to all the time because like we think that's what we should believe. I think it's important to like question like belief systems, or sometimes be like, is that my concern, or is that like the collective concern? Like, yeah, just like the ownership over our like beliefs, I think is something interesting to think about. And then just like as simple as like, did I do something like nice for myself today? Like, I don't know, like I like to sometimes think about that in the morning, like what am I going to do for myself today? That's for me. Like it could be like something super simple that we can definitely achieve, because I think not something crazy that then we won't do and
just adds to the stress.
Yeah, just like a really simple thing you could do, whether that's literally like I'm gonna go for a walk for 5 minutes today, 10 minutes, you know, what can you do, you know, realistically just be small with the thing, or like, oh, I'm gonna go and today I'm gonna carve out 10 minutes, sit down and read a bit of my book, or just simple things that like you decide and consciously do and achieve. Because I think when you don't achieve things and you keep setting goals, that can be pretty,
you're chasing your tail. I think that's such a good part of that, what you've just said, is just having something like achievable that you can be like satisfied with ticking off at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been so good to chat to you.
Yeah, thank you.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode with Bonnie. I always end our calls or WhatsApp chats feeling so inspired and even more driven to do as much as I can with my time here on Earth in a way that's positive to the planet. It's not just about having less of a negative impact, but feeling empowered to actually have a positive impact too by doing more of the right things. So I hope you learnt something from this episode and feel as inspired as I do. If you did enjoy this episode, please do share it with friends or family you think might enjoy it or might benefit from it or might learn something from it. And in the show notes, I'll also be leaving a link to everything that we've talked about in this episode too, as well as Bonnie's social links. As always, if you are enjoying the podcast, please do leave a rating or a review too, as this really helps the visibility of the podcast and for other like-minded people to discover it too. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you back here again soon.